So we at Fashinnovation, for those of you who are not familiar with us and are here for the first time, we're a global platform that really focuses, I'm just admitting people as I say this, but we're focused here at Fashinnovation on bringing people together to really speak about the future of fashion when it comes to the things that really matter for us as an industry to evolve and become better all throughout supply chain. Fashinnovation, we started back in 2018. And we're super excited and honored to say that we've now had over 700 of the leading voices in fashion across the globe speak in our platform just in the last 4.5 years. And it really validated to us that we're really onto something when we say that sustainability is here and it's going to stick and it's going to make a difference. When we were asked to ring the opening bell at NASDAQ beginning of this year, which was so incredible for us, being that we're not a public company, but the invite was based on impact. And that's really what we're all about at Fashinnovation. We're impact driven, we're people first, we're relationship first. And I think that that's what makes us so excited to have all of you joining from around the world, to have these conversations continue to develop and for us to come together and, take it forward. So today we're kicking off digiTALKS, which is going to be webinars that we'll be putting together monthly for all of you to come here to share ideas, to, learn from each other, because we do our biannual events in New York, and we figured we want to keep this conversation going year round. And for today's webinar, I'm so honored and excited to have two people that I really admire, which is Tatiana Alexa, the founder and CEO of Sangrove, who will be moderating Rohit Burman, VP of Sustainability and Inclusion at Calvin Klein Global and PVH Americas. And I'm going to let you both kick this off. I know it's going to be incredible. And let's take it forward. Thank you both so much. And thank you all again for being here.
Monday morning here in New York. And what is the better time to talk about sustainability in a little bit different tone? And I think Rohit and I, we both joined the club of people who want to move and reset sustainability from doom and gloom into something much more inclusive, optimistic, future forward, rather than finger pointing as it used to be, as industry blames consumers blames brands and manufacturers. So how about we reset and find the new tone? Rohit, please elaborate on it.
Thank you, Tatiana, for setting the stage, Jordan and Marcelo for obviously welcoming us, but also just I'd be remiss. I know we're Monday morning here, but I saw colleagues joining in from Singapore, from India. It's late Monday night on your end. Thank you for making the time. So I hope you've had a good Monday and start to the week. And we hope to sort of, at least on your end, make the end of the day feel positive as you unwind on your end, but also good afternoon to those who are joining from Europe. Tatiana, from your end, I know you said sort of, both of us have talked a lot about kind of, the current narrative. And I think for me, just personally, and I'd love for you to also add thoughts on what I share, is just that, when we look back, I think the way of sort of, I'm a believer in positive reinforcement. I think positive reinforcement encourages people. Positivity generates a positive outcome. I think the negative kind of news, headlines, fear, doom, gloom, the journey we've been on, if we look at it and the way we've gone, the arc hasn't actually substantially changed if we look at it, right? We see the news now, we look at, all the pieces from the Paris Accord to what's happening in climate. How much has it shifted, right? That arc is still there, and the fear in a way sometimes holds people back, and fear in, at a personal level, sometimes this can also be paralyzing to think about, what do I do? There's so many things to do. Whereas I kind of tend to take the approach of, we can't boil the ocean. We have to start somewhere and take that first step and positively reinforce that. So I think for me, my mindset is sort of operating from that lens, Tatiana, in terms of the work that we also do. Calvin Klein, I lead this role at Calvin Klein. It's a big global brand. If I start, of course, you have to look at the whole system. but you have to start somewhere and take the first step. Otherwise, there's almost a paralysis from analysis and fear. So it's combating that. It's combating bringing people along and kind of always bringing and meeting people where they are. This is also a journey where I don't have all the answers. Tatiana, you and I talked about it. We don't have the answers. So how do you bring other people into the conversation and make it inclusive to shape that answer forward and to inform your journey? So I'll pause there. It's just my initial thoughts, kind of how we might want to reframe. And I know there are many, many of us who are thinking in this realm as well.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it's a reset. It feels that way, that we are talking about sustainability 2.0. And so in this new chapter, we think about everyone within the industry as an ecosystem. I usually say yin and yang, you know, even like thinking about consumers as people who, you know, use and possess. I believe it's run its course. We need to come up with a better way to describe ourselves, right? Because we are buying too. We all here not naked, we all wear something. So we are part of it, not only from professional world, but from the other things. So it's give and take, and we cannot exist one without each other. So inclusiveness, right? And the new tone and new cause marketing, Rohit, I'm borrowing from your LinkedIn, you're underscoring it as your personal skill as well. So how do we make sustainability and sustainable champions, you know, embracing this new tone and converting it into like a more inclusive conversation? How we do inspire consumers for a change?
It's a great question, Tatiana, and I think all of us in this ecosystem are still on their journey of, like, I don't know if anyone has really cracked the code, but I think a few things I would just say is, one is, you know, often my observation is has been that sometimes the dialogue can be one way, right? So there is, you know, obviously there's regulation. I'm just going to take an example of sort of just product and product information and materials, right? You look at it, there's clearly, and there's need for it. There's regulation that's going to guide more disclosure, transparency, and that's how we should always operate, but that's going to take us there. That's, you know, one way of sort of thinking about, you know, those of us who are operating the space and sharing externally. But how do you actually invite the feedback and the dialogue back, right? So I think what you and I have been talking about is how do you have a two-way dialogue, and maybe not a dialogue that's also two ways, but actually you expand the table to bring different pictures in. But so one example is, you know, for previous hats and current hat, you know, spent a lot of time just, you know, with our frontline, you know, frontline ambassadors. That's the word I will use. And that's individuals who are at retail, you know, not only spending time with educating and informing them internally around what we're offering, why are we doing this, but also sort of how do they have the dialogue with the individual that's coming into the store, into the retail environment, informing them, not pushing it, but, you know, bringing it into the conversation, but also asking for their feedback. Like, what else do you want to see? What else could we do better? You know, how do we sort of go on that journey where the conversation is both ways, and it's not just what we put on the hang tag or a website or other pieces, but actually bringing that dialogue back through your social channels, through your retail associates. So there's a piece there, kind of, that in my mind, I think of, you know, and you use the expression consumer. You and I have talked about maybe we need to evolve that term. I don't have a solution. Maybe someone here today will have a solution for us, but kind of, you know, kind of bringing that conversation in from that lens as well. I think the other piece on this, I think, Tatiana, you and I talked about, is that a lot of it, honestly, I think this journey is about, and this is what I really appreciate about how Jordana and Marcelo have taken this journey. It's not always about a new material, a new packaging, it's also just maybe how do you, it's what we're talking about. What is the innovation, how you bring people into the conversation? What's the innovation in your structure and people structure? What's the innovation that you do and how you communicate, right? So there's room here for us to think about how we actually do those things also to take the arc positively beyond actually really important work that's on the material, packaging, and other elements of the product, but how you actually shape that ecosystem, there's room for innovation there. And that's something that I personally really deeply believe in. And I know you do, Tatiana, so it's something for us to think about and shape that together also for a conversation.
It's interesting that you mentioned the tags and the role of the retail associates on the floor. We know from the research that Gen Z and millennials, people who actually drive that passion for sustainability. And I usually say that at least here in US, kindergarten schools and colleges cook our consumers every day. And we are not forgetting that fashion is an industry, fashion is business. So how do we capitalize on it? How we leverage that?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think from my end, Tatiana, a couple of things in terms of, one is, when we think of Gen Z, right, there's a lot of, and I'm just using a particular demographic group, right? And there's so much there in terms of data insights, just globally, in terms of how Gen Z thinks about sustainability. It's part of top of their mind. The variety of movements in our world have shaped that as well for this demographic. But also we see the shift happening in other demographics as well. There's also this aspect that, I'm going to use this term, and maybe the audience here may not agree, and I'd welcome that also, but to just say, sustainability is also very, if I could put it this way, cool for Gen Z. So at the moment it's cool, and it makes it aspirational also, right? So I think for me, it's this, what happens if it's not cool in the future in any way? Does that make it less desirable for a future demographic segment? So I think, that's just something that's at the back of the mind. My belief is the arc of the world is not going to take us there, and what we live and breathe every day, literally. So I think, from the lens of sort of, aspiration and coolness, how do we make sure we kind of weave this in the conversation to sort of talk about it from a business lens and help redefine aspiration also. So I think part of that is, the conversation you were having is, who are our role models? How are we thinking about the dialogue? How are we talking about different dimensions of who speaks to it? Even when brands bring in ambassadors, who are your ambassadors who are speaking to it, and might we want to revisit and think about in different ways, kind of, who and also being very transparent, authentic, and actually seeing that representation, seeing myself represented in the conversation, in the campaign, people with values that speak to kind of some of the conversations we're having at. So there's that aspect of it, there's the work aspect of it, and then there's this constant piece of learning and bringing people along to sort of redefine aspiration. Going back, like that's kind of the best way I can capture it, Tatiana, is sort of like a really important piece of work for us to do collectively ahead.
So you mentioned it's cool for Gen Z and millennials, so it's very high. I mean, it's been established that it's very high in their priorities. At the same time, it's a generation that puts convenience and affordability probably even higher.
Yeah.
Right. So what we as an industry and as a people who care about sustainability so much can offer to them. Sustainable products are very often more pricey. Finding information takes time and effort that they don't have, right? We know how short is their patience. So also, there is a lot of confusing information, so it takes effort for consumers to figure out if it's a true statement, if it's greenwashing. So sometimes some of them even saying like, we will stop buying new, right? Because we don't believe in those statements that brands push. So figuring out how we can make sustainable products, how we can make sustainability, how we do address it as a whole, that it's still convenient and affordable.
And Tatiana, I would add to that. I know we talked convenience, affordably. What I find as I have conversations, it's also people want fit and comfort, right? So it could be convenient and affordable, but if it doesn't fit you, it doesn't feel comfortable, And in many cases, it's allowed you to express yourself and have that coolness factor. That also, so, I have always believed that, you have to lead with a very strong product, and the product has to actually resonate, right? So it has to feel comfortable. The fit has to feel right. And then you weave in the sustainability element. Just, you could offer, and I'm just going to share openly even how I shop as someone who lives, breathes, and deeply passionate about this. If the product is not going to make me feel good, it's not comfortable, even if it's got all the sustainable attributes, I would have some hesitation in sort of engaging with that product, right? So I think, one is you're hitting on points that I think are really important for us to think about and acknowledge in the ecosystem. Those are really important things to consider. Does it feel comfortable? What is the price point on it? And then how do we weave in sustainability? And, part of it is not going from 0 to 100, right? Part of it is you could slowly, gradually make the shifts over time in terms of your composition, your transformation, because the 0-100 may be a pretty significant price factor that plays out. So how do you actually start taking the steps to take consumers on the journey and even making those small shifts, right? So I think one is that. Two is, I think, acknowledging this other dimension that is really important that I hear from everyone across generations in terms of the choices they make in terms of shopping. And two, I think is, and 3 and 4 for me, Tatiana, is yes, the messaging is a lot. How do we, I don't know if anyone has also, again, here completely cracked it, but for me, it is about how do you keep it simple? Just 2 or 3 things that you want to call out. And for those who want to engage in a deeper way, perhaps it's a QR code that they scan. Perhaps it's through a website that they go to learn more. But what are the few things that you can call out in a very simple way that's a meaningful way to engage? Because not everyone is going to want to read the little bit more of the encyclopedic information, but there will be those who do. So you have to make that one click away, if I could put it, that's easily accessible, but also keeping it simple. And then the last thing for me to add here is, when we talk about all of these things, Tatiana, a huge part is also the redefining. You're talking about, the consumer purchasing patterns, but the redefining aspiration and speaking to the durability, right? So part of these, when you weave it in, is also the longevity and the durability and what it brings into the product, right? So how do we speak to that aspect? Because that is also really important to highlight, because that impacts also choices and price point. So, those are just some initial thoughts.
It's interesting that you're mentioning that product is the first, but we need to find a silver lining, right? Because there is a part of the consumers, and it's a growing part, that are saying that the industry is so bad, we refuse to buy new. At the same time, speaking that, it's an ecosystem and we both need each other, right? We are recognizing that fashion is an important part of our life. We expressing ourselves with fashion. This is the first thing that we see about each other. This is our identity. We want fashion to exist. We want to support this creativity, and it requires buying new, right? So what's the silver lining and how we can achieve it, that middle ground, that the fashion exists, but it's sustainable and the consumers keep expressing themselves this way. And as you see, I'm consciously trying to stay away from the word that, I despise so much, because I feel it's diminishing when we call each other consumers. So that's why I'm pausing every time, because I'm like, yes, there is no better term yet. And it's a way to, to communicate the ideas and thoughts. But oh my gosh, I'm inviting everyone in the audience, because I believe, there is a reason we are all here. So please, your ideas, how do we define ourselves when we're buying and using, taking pretty much, right? Because it needs to be there. So other part of us are giving creativity.
I mean, Tatiana, one or two other things that were coming to my mind as you were speaking is that, I think part of this journey we always, have expected is going to be a linear journey where over time, everything keeps constantly improving. But the reality is that's not life, right? And, if you think of this sector also, there are things that are evolving. Sometimes you take a step back. It's a non-linear journey. You sometimes have to pivot based on new data, new research, new insights, kind of, all of those pieces. So I think, one I want to just say is also this conversation is allowing that grace and space on both sides for the journey to be a little bit non-linear. I think if we only think in a linear concept, I think we may not allow sometimes for a side shift that allows you to actually jump, 3 steps further, right? So I think that's where my mind is. One is, how do we actually consciously also think about having a conversation that allows for that and allows for that space? The other piece is so much of our work often collectively, we all think, because it is the ways we express and it is what shows up on our bodies and what we wear. But so much of the impact also can be with it, which is not visible, right? Within operations, within transportation, within logistics, within things that are being shipped, right? So where I'm going with this is to say, sometimes it's also, I'm going to use this expression, it's equally important and maybe sometimes even more important to get your house in order and focus a little bit more on what might be categorized a little bit as the non-sexy work, if I could put it that way, Tatiana. So how do we make sure that gets elevated too, because that is really important work that actually is foundational that places have to do, and a lot of the emphasis often gets focused on what's visible, but there's a lot of other stuff that can be worked on, and how do we make sure we work on that and also share those stories so that the non-visible thing that can be actually have a very significant impact gets focus and attention also. So, that's a balance that we have to think about like, because there's a positive story that emerges from that too, right? When you do that, and sort of how do we shift the conversation there? And then the third thing, I'm putting a few different things out there. And the third thing in my mind is, we've had so much conversation over time around, what are we making? What's in it? How are we making it? Who's making it? Where are we making it? But I think for me, what I really see the conversation evolution that's happening and should happen more of is, who are we actually making this for, right? Because that also gets to the elements of inclusion, and who are you designing for? Who are you creating it and bringing into the conversation? So I think, there also I see room for us to shape the journey ahead collectively, to push also, and to actually make the ecosystem feel more inclusive.
I'm smiling because, I actually come from the very sexy work, which called innovation, bringing new technologies, bringing new business model, and, very passionate about creating zero waste fashion and bringing consumer along the way. So I don't want to call it a technology because, again, technology is a tool. First, it's a new mindset in the minds of the teams, in the minds inside of the brands. So you mentioned that it's 1 degree at a time and it's not linear. Can you talk more about like embracing the tries and error, if you will, because it does not exist without it, and we need to understand and not to be afraid of that non-linear journey. But
yeah, I mean, and Tatiana, I think part of it, even before going there, is what is the work we have to do, particularly also even in larger organizations, right? Like, I mean, myself and my team, we're a small unit, right? We alone can't actually, we play an important role in the ecosystem. But what I always say, and I think the simplest way for me to say is, I actually work, my team and I work every day to work ourselves out of a job, because well done, this should really be embedded, right? And everyone should be thinking about it. But that's the journey that I think for brands, businesses, larger or smaller organizations, we all have to go on. How do you actually deeply embed this way of thinking and this way of working. And that's part of that is change management. Part of that is mind shifting, right? Part of that is also kind of doing the learning and educating. So a huge part and a huge level of effort that, I'll just speak on my own journey that, I don't actually speak, but actually it has positive impact on the journey ahead. And your conversation, where we started about positive reinforcement is actually investing that time in bringing together that learning, that education, that taking the people on the journey and kind of having that collective conversation internally, because that is really important to actually embed this, because that sets this work, just how we're having this conversation today, right? Bringing people together, sharing ideas, right? That you have to do that work internally. And that's a huge amount of focus and time that myself and my team spend on, and all my colleagues in this space, they will share they realize that's a really important part of it. So one is that, because through that you create trust, you create space for conversation, you create that relationship where you're saying, can we try this? And, okay, you can't try it now, but can we try it 5 months from now? Because I know you have 3 other priorities now. And then, it doesn't work. And when you create that space, it also says, okay, this didn't get to exactly, we wanted to go from New York to Hong Kong, but we got from New York to Tokyo. That's still good. Let's see what else we need to do to get this plane from Tokyo to Hong Kong now, right? So I'm using just simple analogies today, but I think unless you create that space, that trust through that learning and embedding, it's really hard to actually have those deeper conversations when something doesn't work. Because then when it doesn't work, the initial reaction ends up being, let's not do any more of it, right? Whereas the reaction might actually need to be, we got it to this far, what else do we need to shift now to get it to that other destination, right? And that requires that foundational conversation. So I'm actually reframing even your question and how we approach this, because that's the way I think we're able to make shifts.
I would borrow the word pivoting from from my world, which is startups and technology, because we are pivoting and twisting our solution every time. So is it possible for brands, especially those that are so well established as the brand that you represent, and the enterprise level brands, to embrace the same approach of adopting new solution as pivoting, trying, pivoting, learning, and as you just mentioned? Is it possible, or it's a wishful thinking from my side?
Look, and this I'm speaking personally, Tatiana, as the optimist who always wants to make the change, I have to believe it is, right? Otherwise I wouldn't do this. And part of that is taking the time, having individual, small group, large group. It requires a lot of conversation and dialogue. This doesn't happen overnight. And I think trust is the foundation of it. It's the same way that we're talking about trust and transparency, and we use the term consumer, right? How do you make it clear to them? It's internal. That is also needed. And it's also okay for people to disagree, right? So how do we also figure out with disagreement, what are the 2 things? There may be 10 things. What are the 1 or 2 things that we're agreeing on to move things forward, right? So for me, my conversation is always, 1, oriented from that lens. 2, I think you and I have talked about this, Tatiana, and this is underlying what you're suggesting. I'm also a believer that sometimes we do a lot of there's an analysis paralysis. We have to get everything 100% right. We need to know all the impacts, all the data. And I kind of am a believer yes, it's really important to know so that you don't actually steer the plane to Buenos Aires when it needs to actually go to Montreal, right? You don't want to have that complete direction shift. But maybe I know enough that yes, my final destination is Buenos Aires, but right now I know how to get the plane to Miami from New York, right? And that's okay. Can we at least start and going in that direction with our gut, with our knowledge, the work we do, the data and insights we have, so that everything is not actually completely, because you also have a lot of aviation analogy to continue saying that as the flight starts soaring, you will have turbulence, you will have wind shifts, you make adjustments. That's the nature of this, right? And that plays out in this work too. So I think for me is, how do we constantly make sure, and that requires that, going back again, trust, moving forward with knowledge that's at 70%, right? And allowing for grace and space that we will evolve and shift and get there. So I think that is the nature of what you're speaking about in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation, but that's the nature of sustainability and also the journey on inclusion, right? The world is constantly changing. Look, I'll use an example, even in terms of inclusion, in terms of our offering, and you think of how brands support it. The terms used to be in the past, people used a lot more, particularly in the United States context and European context, right? It used to be, the word used to be unisex clothing. You don't actually see that actually used much more. Even a term like that has changed to become gender inclusive, gender fluid, right? You see the terms are changing too. So how do we allow for that to involve also as generations are using the conversation differently? So completely different example, bringing in an inclusion point, but saying we have to allow for that room. You might still be going in that direction or offering more products that are inclusive, but the language and terminology has changed, and you have to change and allow for that change.
So we are changing the way we speak about sustainability, right?
Yeah.
We are searching for a new language, and someone put in the chat patterns. So it's a good start. Maybe, maybe more ideas will come up. We are pushing for innovations that, bring us 2 steps forward, and we are not afraid that 2 steps forward might be also 1 step back, as long as we are trying. So I believe that everyone in this room, if something unites us, is that we are not satisfied with status quo. We are looking for solutions. We are looking for like-minded people. And we are not afraid of trying and maybe failing, but then
and
trying
part
again.
of it is also just acknowledging, right? We also have to be honest amongst each other, right? The nature of this where fashion and apparel as a sector is inherently at the moment, it's a sector that has a component of extracting resources. So inherently there's a consumption model, there's a resource extraction model. Like, we have to be really real about it. Like, you can't actually wipe and put blinders over it, right? So I think for me, it's always, right, how do you actually make a change in being more responsible if you're looking at natural resources that you're using? How do you make a shift in terms of a material choice? So it's constantly thinking of a more sustainable or journey that constantly is minimizing your impact, but also recognizing, like, we have to do it that way because the nature of this is, the way this whole system, this predates you and me being involved in this ecosystem, Tatiana, that we didn't set up, right? That it has been built on this model, right? So that, when it has been this way, will require time also. And how do we constantly keep thinking about every small ways that we can impact? And many of the small ways, collectively have a larger impact, but also may give you runway for bigger things.
And how we are maybe redefining and changing the way people shop and
Yes.
bringing consumers into this journey, again, empowering them with their role. That would be very, very interesting to be part of it, to inspire this change. So Jordana, I know that you are with us. Would you?
I would love, first of all, love this conversation. And honestly, the chat is just going crazy with ideas, people giving each other advice amongst yourselves, which I think is amazing. The words actually that you were asking before, we got end user, buyers, collector. Collector was one that actually someone else used already in the chat. But yeah, so those are the words I see. There's a lot of questions that came through. I mean, I love, you guys were incredible. Everything you said, I love, it's true. It's all about how do we simplify it? How do we start taking small steps? How do we adjust? Is that just something that happens, overnight? But with these conversations and the way that both of you were so transparent and open with each other, I think this is how things evolve. And I feel like the group here, so amazing. Like the engagement, that's for me, like so exciting to see. So thank you both. This was amazing. I would love to, I'm gonna take a few questions here before we close this out. And you know, anyone that has comments, just keep chatting here in the box. And also we'll finish off by Rohit and Tatiana, letting you all know where you can reach them if you want to continue the conversation with them. So yeah, so thank you all so much once again. So a question we have here is, so this is, you guys spoke about this, but Don, how do we change the way consumers engage with brands and reduce the cycle of waste in the fashion industry, the cycles of waste? So which one of you want to kind of answer that in a nutshell with all of what you already shared in that regard?
This is something that, you know, hits very close to home, you know, because we are at Sangrove working in exactly that, bringing consumers early on in the product life cycle. And again, using new technologies, using innovations and creating a new business model, but from consumer point of view, it's a new way to shop. So please feel free to reach me out on LinkedIn. I'm very much open to conversation and bringing, as Rohit said, you know, 1 degree of change every time and pushing forward.
Amazing, thank you. And there's another question here that I really like, because Calvin Klein is such an incredible brand that I'm a huge fan of it. And I know it lasts for a very long time. And someone here is asking, some people discourage wearing of secondhand clothes. However, among the sustainability approach is vintage clothing. As professionals, how can we change people's mindset about secondhand when it comes to these brands that are, you know, incredible and that people don't want to just get rid of it? What would you say to that, Rohit? Any advice?
I love that question, and it also ties back to, you know, what Tatiana was saying as we're thinking about, you know, just the journey and consumption journeys. How do you, one couple of things going back to a conversation, Jordan, one is how do we talk about it in the language and terminology, right? So I think brands also thinking about this is about redefining aspiration, right? So historically, perhaps secondhand has had not the connotations that actually make it desirable, right, for many. So how do you actually think about that? Being honest that it's pre-loved and pre-used, but actually creating interest in things that are durable, timeless, classic, right? So one is the communication piece. Two is actually the business model piece, right? And that is something that many brands are thinking about, whether it's from everything from a rental to a repair to kind of actually, you know, you know, on our Tommy brand here in North America, we have a partnership with ThredUp, and that's consumers get to return. ThredUp then puts it up on their site. It's also on the Tommy site. You can purchase pre-loved Tommy items that, you know, and it gets the same kind of, you know, putting it in the same way, in the same ecosystem as, if I could use the same term, that is a new product offering, right? So giving it that same kind of cachet and presence, right? And not minimizing it. So it's both ways. It's having the model, it's having the communication, it's taking people on the journey of like the impact. And so we try to really speak. And I'm not going to say that we have it perfect. We're also learning from insights through it, and every brand is, you know, but actually communicating your purchase of this saved XYZ or what it made happen, right? And like giving people guidance on wash and how to maintain it and how to keep it longer and durable, right? So I think those are all aspects that are really important. I think there was a comment I saw in there, and I will be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, because I actually also deeply believe in that, and I had acknowledged in the beginning, in the frame of all of this legislation is really important, Jordana. I think sometimes in life we actually need that push, right? So I think we can do all of these things, but I think how do we as a society also start putting that in place and driving that? So putting those requirements in place really is something that helps drive a lot. And I would be remiss if I didn't honestly acknowledge that actually helps me in my journey, kind of personally believing in this and making the case. So I would say, I think that regulation piece is really important too. And I'm really glad to see more of that coming up.
Yeah, I love that so much. And someone here wrote, that's true, Rohit. Communication and presence helps to push pre-loved items the messaging makes all the difference about Udall says that. So thank you for that comment and thank you for that, Rohit. I loved it. And I also think legislation, I completely agree with you. And I'm seeing a little bit of a movement going on already toward that. So let's hope for more of that. But thank you so much for that answer. And the final question I'm going to ask, because there's a lot here, and it's not that I'm not wanting to ask all of them, but I mean, let's just keep this going after we can exchange emails and connect with each other. But the final question is also one that I'm intrigued by. So I feel like right here in this call, looking at everyone who's joined, it's, a lot of industry, everyone is in the industry in some way. But I feel like the consumers are still a little bit like not really sure of what this whole sustainability thing really is, right? The education piece is really lacking, I feel. What are some simple ways you and Tatiana and you, Rohit, maybe just one each that you think we could start to implement to have the consumer outside of everything you mentioned with ThredUp, but for the consumer even to understand why is shopping on ThredUp important? What are some ways that we can get that education going a little further outside of all the wonderful things both of you already said?
I think it's very important to measure impact that we all create, and it doesn't include only fashion, like in all ways that we contribute to sustainability, whether by changing the way we shop, or is it by switching the light, when we don't use it. How we can measure it in the same way that, and again, I communicated to consumers, patrons, kins, and all of this, and users, to ourselves, in a way that we understand what is behind it. And this is one of the very important thing that we at Sangrove do, because this is on our minds. Measuring impact, communicating impact, so everyone understands that if I'm changing the way I behave, this leads to what?
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
And of course, this will take a village. This will take everyone, and I hope that I can describe people in the room, because otherwise, why would you be here? So we are agents of change, right? So it's up to us to move this narrative into more practical, measuring impact, finding new solutions, pushing for innovations.
Amazing.
I know we're at time, Jorana. I will just add that simply, I couldn't agree with everything Tatiana said, but I would just say also, like, we ourselves are consumers, right? So like, I don't want to separate, it goes back to the conversation, like acknowledging we're that. So how do we, also have that conversation within our own circles, right? So I'll just say, honestly, it's a conversation I have with my mother. I have with with friends, with other cousins, right? Like just asking the question, figuring that out, because really it's important for each of us to play that role besides what we do in our work, but in our personal lives too. So, and then, in a very simple way, I really do believe that the front line, there's obviously so much is through e-com platforms, but if you have a brick and mortar or you have frontline stores, how do you make sure the people who are your ambassadors? That's why I'm very committed to it, and investing in time training for our retail staff and our store managers, just so they understand and they can speak in simple ways. That's not jargon and can really kind of engage the consumer, because the jargon just loses people. It loses me too. So, and I'm passionate about this. So how do we make sure we distill it to that simple piece?
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I feel like it's exactly that. When we use these just industry words, we need to really, people have to feel, right? How does it relate to me? How does it impact me? And that's through conversation. So I loved it so much. Yeah, I mean, thank you both so much. This was incredible, so insightful, so inspirational, lots of education behind it. Do you each want to let everyone know how to find both of you? Because I know there's a lot of questions we couldn't get to. So just wanted to find that out.
Of course, Joanne.
Yeah, LinkedIn is my best friend, so please feel free to reach out. And it's also Tatiana.Alexa@sangrove.com. So would love to continue this conversation with everyone, every agent of change within this virtual room.
Right.
I'll echo the same. LinkedIn is absolutely the best. I always do respond back, but just give me grace and space. You know, if you don't get back in 24 hours, within a week, I will definitely do. But just know that's definitely the place, and I will be more than happy to connect with anyone.
Thank you. And I have to say, like, both of you are so accessible with the work that you do, really. And I appreciate both of you so much. And yeah, when they say that, they really mean it. They're open to conversation. They're both here today speaking to all of you and taking this time on a Monday morning. So I just appreciate both of you very much. This is what the industry needs more of. And the more we do this, I really do believe this is the way forward. So thank you both so much again. Thank you for everyone who joined today. And I cannot wait to continue these conversations. Have a beautiful Monday and a great week, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rohit. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, everyone.